This is a man without whom the scene of American music would be very different indeed. As a conductor, he had the New York Philharmonic for many years and has worked with most of the leading orchestras of the world. As a composer, he has written symphonies and fancy-free, liturgical music and West Side Story. Leonard Bernstein.
Hello.
Is it true that your parents didn't want you to be a musician?
It is true.
How come?
You have done your homework.
A Jewish boy in America?
I wager I could find you other Jewish boys who have the same story to tell. Most Jewish parents, of course, you're right, in assuming that most Jewish parents did want their sons to, if they showed any musical talent at all, to be Heifetz or
Right.
Rachmaninoff or Misha Illman or somebody, usually a violinist. Mine didn't. And I suppose my father belonged to that group of fathers who, being a self-made man, having started out cleaning fish under the Brooklyn Bridge or whatever, and somehow getting involved with the beauty parlor supplies business, and having wound up in Boston, Massachusetts, where I was born and raised, wanted that to go on. He wanted me to take it over. He didn't want to see it die. And in his mind, I guess the one sensible alternative that he would have gone along with would have been for me to be a rabbi, because he was a very deeply religious man and a Talmudic scholar, very, very keen intellect and a very intelligent man. And a man of wide knowledge, all limited to Talmudic sources. In other words, whatever he knew out of the Talmud. His spelling, his grammar was not to be believed, atrocious. But very wise and bright, compassionate, and always ready with an analogy or a parable or something for any occasion, pass the water or anything like that, from the Bible or the Talmud that was apropos. And you could almost never say anything like, how nice to see you, Bernard. Oh, apropos Bernard, you know, Moses said that. All people named Bernard were Levites or something. He always had a point to make. And I caught something of that. I think I inherited, or perhaps it was simply environmental or osmotic.
But you didn't, in fact, follow in the family business. What was the spur?
Nor did I become a clerical person.
But what was the spur that made you a musician? Was it very early, your interest in music?
Well, that's an oft-told tale. Do you really want me to tell it again? All about our Aunt Clara, my crazy Aunt Clara, and all that? Well, my father had a sister named Clara who did like music and did get divorced and moved away from Boston and didn't know what to do with some of her heavier articles of furniture. And so she stored them in our rather already crowded apartment. And among these articles of furniture was an old beat-up vertical piano, upright piano, which had a wonderful feature. It had a middle pedal called a mandolin pedal, which when depressed would turn the whole piano into a mandolin. And that was fascinating. I was 10 years old when this thing arrived at our house. It was stuck out in the hallway. We had no room for it. But I couldn't be pried away from it. And the minute I touched it, that was that. From that day to this, that has been my story.
That really was
just like that. I touched the piano and I knew I had touched God in my way. Or, to put it in rather more Freudian terms, I had touched a world where I felt safe, where nobody could harm me, or and which could be indissoluble. Since my parents' marriage was kind of shaky and the atmosphere around my childhood was rather shall we say, not solid. And children, as you know, who grow up in such an atmosphere tend to seek some kind of solidity apart from that to substitute for it. Some find other surrogate fathers or mothers, or surrogate friends, or something to substitute for, or something to make a feeling of a family. I found the piano. I found the world of music. I found that I could improvise on it, that I could make up my own system of harmony with my own terminology, that I could play anything that I had heard on the radio by ear.
Did you have no lessons at all?
I immediately demanded lessons because I had to read music, and I got them after a lot of screaming and kicking for $1 an hour once a week from a young lady with whom I promptly fell in love named Frida Karp. I had this lesson a week. That went on for a year or so, by which time I was out reading her and out playing her, and she didn't know what to do with me except to send me to another teacher. So on I went to the New England Conservatory, where I was assigned to a teacher who cost $3 a lesson. And at that point, my father said, no, too much. This is ridiculous. You're going to turn out to be a musician, namely a klezmer. Now, I don't know if you know that word, but in the shtetl life, in the old country, in the Russian ghetto life from which he came, a musician was a klezmer. There was no musical life that he was aware of, and therefore I was not aware that there was a musical life in Boston. I mean, that one could buy a ticket to a concert and go and hear music. I didn't know such a thing existed till I was about 14. But for him, a musician was a klezmer, which is little better than a beggar. A klezmer was a clarinetist or a fiddler or something, a Chagall type, fiddler on the roof type, who would wander from town to town, playing at weddings and functions, things like that, and be fed and thrown a few kopecks, and then on to the next town and the next function. A fair, as they were fond of saying.
When did you first then do something professional that made it clear that you were going to have a successful life in music as well as...
Well, that was never really clear to him until I was 25 and the famous event happened where Bruno Walter was sick and I had to take over at a few hours' notice with no rehearsal and all the rest of it. Named the front page of the New York
Overnight
Times
stardom, just like in the movies, right?
Just like the movies.
Did you from the start wanted to play, conduct and compose, or was one of them dominant first and the others only arrived later?
Conducting was the least of it. Conducting never occurred to me until I was graduated from Harvard, as a matter of fact. I'd never thought of being a conductor.
But a pianist and a composer?
Well, yes, everything else.
Yeah.
I mean, a musician.
A musician.
All I wanted to do after graduating from Harvard was, where I'd studied music among other things, but minimally, because I wanted to study so much else, which I had the good fortune to do, was to go find a job in music. I didn't care what it was, as long as I was in music. And it was at that point, after the summer, after my graduation had passed, without my finding a job in New York. I'd gone to the big city to look for a job. Failed. Came home in despair on September 1st, 1939, a date that will live in infamy for other reasons, and was almost ready to go into the beauty parlor supply, but almost. I mean, I wouldn't have, but I was in such despair because of the war and because of the state of the world. At that point, Britain had just declared war and the Polish question. And so I toyed with that notion for a minute and then was blissfully saved by the appearance on the scene of Dimitri Mitropoulos, great conductor, whom I had met some years before when he had conducted in Boston. I was a Harvard student, had met him just at some tea or other. And he reappeared in my life in a rather occult way. It's strange that I hadn't seen him since then. 3 years had gone by. And I told him my sad tale. And he said, but you must be a conductor. You must be a conductor. I said, well, how do you know? He said, there's certain things I know. I just know. And I said, well, how does one become a conductor? What do? You have to have an orchestra to practice on. And he recommended me to the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia, where Fritz Reiner was giving conducting lessons, classes. I went. I was, to my amazement, accepted by Fritz Reiner, who was a great master, and spent that year with him at Curtis. And the following summer, Kusevitsky, who was the conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, my hometown orchestra, but a man I had never met the whole time I had been there. I had seen only from the remoteness of the second balcony, this tiny, glamorous figure in the distance, a worshipful figure that I had never dreamed of emulating. This same Kusevitsky announced that he was opening a school called the Berkshire Music Center in connection with what was known as the Tanglewood Festival, the summer festival of the Boston Symphony in western Massachusetts. And I leapt at that and went to Boston and met Kusevitsky, applied for this thing, armed with letters from all kinds of people, including Metropolis and Bill Schumann and Aaron Copland, people I had met meanwhile, who believed in me, Roy Harris. And I had a truckload of letters. And Kusevitsky said, but of course I will take you in my class. No audition. And so that summer I studied with him. Then I went back to Reiner in the winter, and I went back to Kusevitsky in the summer. And they were just perfect. They were perfectly diametrically opposed kinds of teachers, so that I had the best of all possible worlds, Reiner being a very demanding, didactic pedagogue who would stop you in the middle of something while you were conducting a Brahms piece with a pianist playing the score. And he would say, what is the second clarinet playing at this moment? And you didn't know whether there was a second clarinet playing at that moment. And you were always stymied and paralyzed. That kind of standard is what he set. And that kind of standard is what I have kept to this moment. Whereas Kusevitsky was an inspirational kind of teacher who perhaps himself didn't know what the second clarinet was exactly playing at that moment, but taught in terms of the sun coming out, it is so warm, the music must be warm like the sun, and very inspiring, I must say. And between the two of them, I had a total conductorial education.
And what about composing? When did you start composing?
I always composed.
Yeah, but I mean, when did it really become something important in your life and important in music?
It was always important in my life. It was never important to anybody else until when? Until my first symphony was played, Jeremiah. And it was played in Pittsburgh, courtesy of Fritz Reiner, who invited me to come there and conduct it with his orchestra in 1944. And that was also a front page of the next morning paper. The reaction was extraordinary. Everything that happened that year just turned to gold, including that debut at the Philharmonic, the premiere of Jeremiah, the premiere of my first ballet, which was 3 months later, Fancy Free. Then a show was made on that theme called On the Town, and that was a big hit. That was all within the space of 12 or 14 months.
Quite a year.
Extraordinary year. And it began with me at the nadir of my life, ready to jump in the lake. I had been twice rejected by the army, so I didn't even feel good enough to fight for my country or fight Hitler or whatever, nor could I get a decent job.
You obviously bridge two worlds of music, and it doesn't even present itself like that to you. It's clearly you write music, and there's different kinds of music. But nonetheless, the world makes this absurd distinction. Have you always felt from the start equally at home?
Well, it's not such an absurd distinction if the world makes it. I mean, there must be a reason why this distinction is made.
Well, the world, there's a bad reason as well, isn't there? They look down on theatre music. They think this is not serious.
No, not theatre music so much as pop songs and... no, there's a great... let me put it another way. Theatre music has achieved a certain kind of status, a certain kind of dignity in the world. There is a distinction between it and, let's say, the symphony.
Yeah.
My Jeremiah Symphony and my show on the town were at that time very different. But my third symphony and West Side Story, which were around the same time, were not so different to general ears. I mean, not so much fuss was made about distinguishing between Unterhaltungsmusik and E-Musik and U-Musik, as the Germans say. Fun music as opposed to serious music. Whereas I've always maintained that if serious music isn't fun, it's not worth anything.
Right.
And if fun music isn't serious, it's usually not worth anything. So that it is, to me, all one thing. Music is music. Whether it's a very great Beatles song or a very great Schubert song, I can put those on the exact same level. I would not put a Beatles song on the same level as a Schumann symphony, naturally, because the intention is quite different, right? The aesthetic intention and the artistic, not only intention, but the involvement and the amount of work that's gone into it and so on is all altogether different, represents a different niveau of intellectuality and inner intelligence. But in the sense of songs, there are Beatles songs that I would rank with Schubert songs. There are Gershwin songs that I would rank with Schubert and Tchaikovsky songs. And in the world even of salon music, or the pieces that people look down on rather as being music for accomplished young ladies to play in the evening after dinner to amuse the guests. Chopin Mazurka, whatever. Certain pieces of Mendelssohn or Elgar, the spring song of Mendelssohn, for example, Elgar's Salut d'amour, or whatever, are really very beautiful pieces and can be equated with similar short pieces of Beethoven, Mozart, whatever.
Who would you say has influenced you as a writer, as a composer? Anybody?
Everybody. I think that every composer is influenced by every composer that ever preceded him, some more than others, of course, since one naturally takes more kindly to certain influences than to others.
Right.
So you feel a certain kinship. And yet, one has no predecessor in the world from whom one doesn't receive something. I mean, I could go through any Beethoven sonata, the most original, the most extraordinary, Beethovenian kind of, even late sonata, and show you all the origins in Haydn, or in Mozart, or in Bach.
What about Bernstein?
I could show you a lot of Stravinsky, a certain amount of Gershwin, a certain amount of Schoenberg even. I left out the name Aaron Copland as a very big influence. But he was also very much influenced by Stravinsky. And so this thing comes down the ages, so to speak. I mean, Stravinsky was very much influenced by Ravel and Scriabin and Rimsky-Korsakov, who were in their turn very much influenced by César Franck, Glinka, Schumann, who was very much influenced by that. So that there is no end to this chain. And I think this continuity of music is one of the greatest things about it. And the denial of it is one of the most foolish exercises in aesthetics that people waste their time with. I'm sorry.
Well, something seems to have gone wrong because I'm interested to know whether you feel the same still. You said, wrote 20 years ago, you said that the gulf between composer and audience is now as wide as an ocean. Would you say the same today? Would you say the gap is wider or less wide? Or anyway, if there's a gulf, what is this gulf?
There is indeed a gulf. However, there is an enormous attempt being made on all sides. By all, I mean on the side of the composer, of the public, of the presenters of music, symphony orchestras, pianists, whatever, to bridge this gulf in some way. Composers have a very strong nostalgic yearning for the old days, even though some of them won't admit it. But by the old days, I mean simply tonality, which was abandoned at a certain point by many composers in our century. Now, some abandoned it in the 20s, some abandoned it not until the 50s and 60s, but and for different reasons. There were different schools involved, different leaders of these abandonments. But the fact is that tonality was abandoned because most people felt that they couldn't say anything new or original in the old tonal terms.
You haven't abandoned it, that's
Never.
very clear.
Nor have I excluded non-tonal music. I mean, I write non-tonal music when it's condign to do so. But mainly, I feel it must be in the context of tonality, because tonality is the air we breathe, and it's the world we live in.
That's the point, isn't it? Surely that's where the gulf is. If it is the air we breathe, it is.
But as I say,
natural,
composers, most composers, even the most outrageously non-tonal composers, are struggling in one elusive way or another to get back to tonality in different new contexts. Through allusion, through nostalgic reference, mixed up, of course, with tape sounds and serial sounds and funny noises and things that will make it sound new. But what they are trying to get back to is D major and C major and melodies, good Lord.
Some of them seem to find it very difficult, getting back.
It is a very difficult, critical moment.
But yes, it is a critical moment, because I can't help feeling that the audience is losing the tradition of listening to new music in the way it was customary for, I don't know, 300 years without a break. What happened? Where did it come off the rails?
It used to be that the new Verdi opera, the new Puccini opera was the subject of great excitement, anticipation, and
above all, popular
conversation.
Excitement.
And everybody's excitement. Right.
Well, what happened?
The abandonment of tonality, as I said before.
Right, but then why?
Why did people abandon tonality?
Right, why?
Because there wasn't anything more they thought that they could do with it and still sound original.
But that must be nonsense. You might as well say that people stopped writing novels or plays because Shakespeare wrote the best plays ever.
Oh, but people have. I mean, what is the new novel all about? What is the new auteur film all about?
Well,
what is abstract painting all about?
Well,
what is
this happened to the arts in general?
What is an interpretable, impenetrable poem about?
What does this
It's
say
an
about our
attempt
civilization?
to be oneself, to be original for originality's sake. And it turns out, in the end, nobody particularly cares about that. Now, there is some very beautiful abstract art, and there are some very beautiful, difficult poems, which used to be called impenetrable and turned out to be quite penetrable, like the Four Quartets of Eliot or The Wasteland, or...
Then are we eventually going to catch up with the musicians as well?
We are.
Is it our fault?
Because we're trying. If we survive, and I mean physically survive, I mean if we can get through the next year or two alive, because we seem to be dedicated to the proposition that we shall not get through the next year or two alive, or the next week or two alive, if things proceed as they are at this moment. For example, I'm going to Israel this weekend for 2 weeks, and I don't know what I shall find there. I don't know if I'll ever come out. I'm not being melodramatic, right? But it is that brinky
Oh, sure.
It's that tinderboxy.
It's a dangerous world.
And if we do survive, I think we are going to come out with a great return to representational painting, to intelligible poetry, to tonal music, to novels which read like novels,
right.
instead of novels in which you can take the pages out and realign them as you wish, aleatoric novels or whatever. And I do think we are going to come back to enjoyable art. In other words, art that not only upsets and reveals, but art that gives pleasure and catharsis.
If not, could music die?
Music can't die, no.
I mean, I don't think existing music can go on forever, and indeed, I'd be perfectly happy to go and listen to it.
No, there will always be new music because there will always be new popular music. And out of that will come serious music, just as all serious music has always come out of popular music. Just as the most complicated Bach fugue has come out basically of the Martin Luther chorale, which came from folk music. And just as everything has come from folk sources. So there will always be some kind of fresh, popular, earth-rooted source from which art can come and grow to the most sophisticated developmental heights. I'm not in despair about that at all.
Clearly.
I'm worried only about survival and also the quality of survival. I'm very much worried on what basis we will survive and whether we can be more than vegetables and animals.
Tell me, looking back over your achievements, your musical achievements, are you content? Do you feel that what you have added to music, which simply measured is a great deal of quality, are you happy with it?
Yes, I feel I've only begun to compose, though. That's a big problem. At my age, it's a very big problem, because who knows how many years are left. I'm 63. I mean, it's pretty old. I know, how old are you?
53.
Oh, you're a
Give me
baby.
10 years.
Just a baby.
I haven't started to compose.
Yes, but you've started to do other things. Then a lot of my non-musical achievements satisfy me or gratify me to a great extent. Like the 3 best children you ever saw in your life, and relationships, human relationships that are very, very important to me, dear, precious, and significant. Musically, I don't really pride myself in anything I've done except some music I've written, and more in the music I am about to write. For example, in opera, I'm in the middle of writing.
Aha, at last.
Except for these 7 months when I have to be conducting, and I can't touch it till October.
Good luck with it.
Thank you very much.
Leonard Bernstein, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.